Direct and Indirect, Utilizing Normal and Extraordinary Forces, Strategic and Mechanical Guide, excerpt from Sun Tzu. The force which confronts the enemy is the normal, that which goes to his flanks, the extraordinary. No commander of an army can wrest the advantage from the enemy without extraordinary forces. He who knows the art of the direct and the indirect approach will be victorious. This first passage, as I kind of point out later, is only partly true, because there are scenarios where you can just overpower an opponent with more stuff. Oh, that's the one going home. If the opponent has a similar ability to produce items in the game, often dividing your forces and striking in multiple locations will increase the odds that you'll get some damage dealt. Excuse me 1 second. Someone might have just arrived. Okay, we're good. It's Violet. He just got back from DreamHack. So the strategy of it. Invincibility lies in the defense. The possibility of victory in the attack. So, 2 players, they're both producing army. If it's at a similar rate, the attacker, by the time they get to the defender, will have less army than the defender will. And then the defender will beat the attacker and then be able to push back and have the advantage. So a way to work around that is to present your army, engage with the enemy, and then partition off a small group of forces to strike somewhere where there are less defenses. So a really common attack is you do a Roach Hydra push, and you have 1 Overlord with 4 roaches in it, and you drop that at the same time. Either the opponent will defend your attack perfectly and take damage to the Roach drop, or they'll defend the Roach drop really cleanly and then maybe mess up the main engagement. So by using direct and indirect, you double your odds of successfully crippling the opponent in some way. Make the enemy conceive your normal force to be the extraordinary, and your extraordinary to be the normal. Moreover, the normal may become the extraordinary, and vice versa. So, you can think about the approach that you want to take to a matchup. You can have your main army be the primary focus, and then you can have a very small extraordinary force, like in the example of a Roach Hydra push with a single Roach drop. Or you could shift that balance, and you can have a much larger extraordinary force than your normal force. You can say, alright, instead of having a big army that pushes directly and a single Overlord drop, you could nidus the majority of your army into the opponent's base and then, say, do a Ling run by, which is a smaller expenditure at a different base. Head-on engagements create a single point of opportunity for the opponent to fail. To wrest the advantage from an enemy with equal or greater army, use indirect tactics and extraordinary forces to surprise, distract, and cripple. Think of normal and extraordinary as a fighter wielding a large sword in one hand and a small dagger in the other. When the opponent focuses their attention on one, strike hard with the other. Defending a double or triple pronged attack is much more complex an equation to solve than simply gathering everything you have to engage all enemy forces. F2 is a function in StarCraft that a lot of players use. You can get to a pretty high level with it, but it's very limiting in terms of how well you can relegate different responsibilities to your forces. So if you're using F2, the big direct engagements are going to be fairly easy and straightforward to manage, but whenever forces are divided in various ways, you're going to have a pretty bad time. Generally in battle, use the normal force to engage, use the extraordinary to win. So win, in this case, isn't necessarily to kill their last building and to end the game. Winning in StarCraft a lot of times means you achieve a victory condition of some kind. So rather than necessarily killing their whole army and everything, if your Roachra, say for example, or a Nidus Lurker play, kills enough of their economy, they will lose just by virtue of having less ability to match your production rate over time. Aggressive moves clearly shape the progression of the conflict by deciding where and when the battles will be fought. Maps have a clear, direct attack path with powerful armies, and where they excel with small forces are crushed. The landscapes also have openings to air attacks and drops where a small fighting force can deal tremendous damage to less defended areas. So you can think about air and ground. This is one of the aspects that Sun Tzu doesn't address because there were not flying units in that period. It follows some similar principles, but the idea is the main attack lanes are going to be where the big armies are going to do best. Main armies, you kind of notice, if they're going up small ramps and trying to defend, say, a main base that has a bunch of production, it gets very congested and they can't really leverage their full strength. But say an Overlord drop or Medivacs dropping units or air harassment can be super, super potent in those spots. What's up? 4. If he prepares to the front, his rear will be weak, and if to the rear, his front will be fragile. If he prepares to the left, his right will be vulnerable, and if to the right, there will be few on his left. And when he prepares everywhere, he will be weak everywhere. Attacks and defense are not free. They cost minerals, gas, and supply, and infrastructure. Notice where the opponent is investing most heavily, and work around the strongest points of their progression. In StarCraft, it's possible to play hyper-defensively, to the point where no base can be broken, but the defender forfeits the ability to punish rapid expansion. What's up, friend? And tech research. This sacrifice leaves them vulnerable to starvation if the assertive player can prevent future expansions. So a lot of players will be very frustrated against turtling opponents, kind of like the principle earlier on, invincibility lies in the defense. If the defending player masses a very strong, sturdy, slow army, attacking directly into them is rarely going to be favorable for you, unless you just have superior production and you max out a lot faster. Think about where your opponent is spending their gas, especially. Gas in StarCraft is more precious than minerals, and it also kind of indicates the specialization of the army, what they're teching into in particular. If you don't know where the opponent is spending their gas, you need to find out, either by running some attack units in just to see what their army looks like, or scouting with an overseer, observer, whatever. Another thing you can think about too, the hyper-turtly opponent, say the one who does the ring of missile turrets all around their base, so you can't fly in with anything. They have an incredibly sturdy army. Say you're playing against Avalo or something. Think about having a plan to deny a certain expansion. Day9 put it pretty well. You can, rather than say, I want to crush the opponent and just like do a big timing and hope to win, you can have a plan to deny a 5th base. In StarCraft, the 5th base is kind of the most exploitable one that you can reliably deny if you have good macro getting to that point. Denying a 4th is also an option, but with the flow of the various maps, the 5th base is usually more exposed to attack paths than the 4th base is. So I'm going to invite Travis, and I see Snap. We'll get into a Dusk Towers game, just so we can kind of have a map to look at as a reference. Get an AI. Is Ligerman one in this? Alright. When direct damage cannot be dealt, indirect advantages can be taken by baiting a strong army to pursue. The chase buys time for production, and more potential success for different groups on areas distant from the opponent's forces. One is never obligated to take a particular engagement. It is wiser to sacrifice a base than to commit a losing army to defeat, so be willing to wait for alternate opportunities. I'm sure myself and everyone else has taken fights that you think you're going to lose, or maybe you feel like you have to take in the game. You just get annihilated. It's fairly unfortunate, but it happens. And then you kind of realize it as it's happening. Ah, that was a really poor engagement to take. How unfortunate. So those are kind of the broad strokes of the strategic ideas of normal and extraordinary, large and small forces. Now we'll look at the mechanical execution of how to pull those moves off. I put the AI as a Protoss, and I'll kind of do Nerchio's triple-pronged. It's like 3 overlords in the main, some Ling Hide presence at the opponent's 5th, and Lurker Nidus in their natural. So you can think about the layout of this map. You have a main, a natural, and a third that are all very close to each other. And then you have a couple 4th base options. I'll kind of macro up, just in a very kind of simple and straightforward way. Drone production and whatnot. So it's ZVP. How do you guys play ZVP in Discord? What unit compositions and timings do you have in your plan?
Recently I've been doing Hydra Bane Ling because that just seems to be really fantastic.
Hydra Bane generally is going to be the very strongest against Stargate Phoenix base play, where if you think about the Protoss spending their gas into Phoenix, every Phoenix that they produce is 1 less sentry worth of gas, which means they're going to have less force fields to kind of block off against your Banes. And it also means less Immortals. Phoenix, Immortal, and Sentry are all 100 gas each. So I'll just go through each before pool. It's a very easy AI, it probably won't harass us too much. So, anytime you want to kind of understand a map, you can just look at the mini-map and think about the formation of the bases. Think about the proximity. How close are the bases to each other? The main is at a very nice high ground location, but there's this really big kind of cliff area that's exposed to air. In the late game, it costs quite a bit to, like, say, put a bunch of cannons or spore crawlers on this ridge. So one thing you can do, kind of anticipating the flow of the map, is just have a few dedicated units here to defend extraordinary forces from the opponent. In ZVP, if you're going for a Hydra base play, one way of sort of approaching that is just putting 4 Hydras in the main. You don't even need a hotkey then. Just put 4 Hydras like right here on this ridge, and when they swing in with an Oracle or a Warp Prism or a Void Ray, we'll pick it off really, really quickly. Oh, I forget the very easy AI does that. Really fast Stalker. Rip the Overlord. What a god. So, another Sun Tzu quote. One may know how to win, but cannot necessarily do so. Execution matters quite a bit, and you can have a pretty solid game plan, but it's not really going to go perfectly for you every time, even if it's a really great idea. That's something to put forward whenever you're thinking about your losses, is just because a given attack didn't work one particular time, doesn't mean you should throw it out entirely and say, oh, that's just a bad move, I shouldn't do this anymore. Often it takes a lot of repetition, kind of like training a musical piece, to be able to get a build really crisp. So I'll just take a layer first. I don't really need to get too fancy with upgrades and stuff. Supply blocks. Let's take the gases. My processor is having a tough time with this. Look at this probe. Okay. There's a decision here on this map where to take your fourth base. Against Terran, usually I won't take this particular fourth base location. I'll take the other one, mainly because of this ridge here. Terran has a bunch of really long-range siege units they can use at a really early time. Whereas Protoss, not quite as much. Like, they could shoot at you from stalkers, but really the range of the unit that's at this cliff dictates how much of this they can actively shoot. And if you have a really big army, you can kind of fight them here at the center of the map before they get into that area, start messing you up. So this isn't exactly the build. It's not really the point of the exercise. Mainly it's to demonstrate how to create the control groups and maneuver the forces in a way that allows you to do the triple prong attack. Whoa. I'm closing Skype. Oh, is it the game that's lagging because of the new patch? Queen versus a stalker. Who wins? Actually, I want to test. Queen should win. Yeah. Today we win. So, one thing that the core is really good for is you have lots of hotkeys that are within really close reach. So I hotkey the Nidus network. The nice thing about that is you can center your camera on the Nidus to set up your various strikes against the opponent. Another thing is having some overlords hotkeyed. So let's put this overlord here. And then whenever we want to set up the Nidus, we can just double tap the overseer and then go straight there. Or overlord, whatever. Got lurkers, got hydras. Let's make some lurkers. And we'll start dividing the units. So normally I just have them in my main attack group, but since we want to do a triple prong attack, we'll do 3 different hotkeys for it. So hotkey 1, this will be the main army. We can just have a nice forward position, kind of in the center of the map. This will be the Lurker Nidus play. The thing Neuro did, about 8. We don't need to be super precise about that. And then, let's do a drop group as well. So let's get 3 overlords. 3 dropper lords go here. And then we'll box some stuff. 4 hydras. Yeah. So I put in the notes a really nice aspect of using the add steel, create steel hotkeys in StarCraft is you can just box some units and then hotkey them, and it adds them to a new group and removes them from existing groups. So I can move around these drop units here, move around my main army here, and they're not all kind of clumped together. You can keep them clearly distinct from each other. Here's the overseer. Now I want to try and kind of time this so it all hits at once. I'll have the units get in the overlords. The overseer is going to go over to the natural. And then the Protoss had a base here. Showtime did. So I'm kind of poking here. Double tap the overseer. Start the Nidus. Drop overlords. Drop in the main. Let's say the Protoss army was here. You can kind of poke and fall back. And then keep building units. Nidus finishes. Units come out. Throw them. Units are dropped. Kind of let them do their thing. And then often when these 2 points are pressuring the opponent, you can strike here, because it'll say, well crap, that's a lot of stuff in my base. I need to go defend that with everything. And then their 3rd or 4th here are totally exposed. So whatever hotkeys you use kind of depends on what's comfortable for your setup. I use the core, so it's like I, K, and L for my hotkeys, but you could use 1, 2, and 3 if you're using a more standard hotkey layout. Yeah, it was a really excellent sort of multi-prong victory. It seemed like Neuro wasn't able to adapt his style enough moving forward, so he had that fantastic win in the first game on Dusk Towers using that triple prong attack. And then for the rest of the games, he kind of went for almost the exact same thing, where he would go for 3 Overlords of drop, he would go for a Nidus, and it was Ling Hydra Lurker. One thing that you can use to your advantage with heavy indirect pressure is the next time you face that same opponent, you could do a fake where you still take a Nidus network and you Nidus the opponent, but maybe you put only 4 roaches in it instead of 8 lurkers, which is a much, much smaller expenditure. It's a much, much smaller extraordinary force, but sometimes they'll still give a really big reaction to it, because they'll say, oh shit, this could be a huge attack like it was last time. When in the second case, you will have a bigger army pushing at their outer bases with a smaller force that's in their main and natural. Kvoth Dota, I sent you the Discord link. Check your email. You can hop in if you like, but we've covered a lot of the stuff already. It'll be highlighted. Don't worry, fam. So, guys in Discord, what's your hotkey setup? Like, how do you manage your control groups? 1, 2, 3, 4, all that stuff?
I use the core as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of adjusted my hotkeys radially around ASDF, so I've got hotkeys on 1, 2, 3, 4, Q, W, E, R, and then I use Shift for all sorts of other stuff. It's kind of hard to explain.
I gotcha. That was the setup that I used before the core, which is basically you start with the setup that Blizzard gives you, where you kind of have your hand at the normal home row of WASD, and then kind of go hotkey by hotkey within your layout and see like which ones are of ridiculous reach. So Infestation Pit by default is bound to I, changing that to Y, like that process of kind of bringing everything in and easier for you to reach. So let's think about some different types of combos that you could leverage against the opponent in terms of direct and indirect. There was a really cool one that Violet used against Ayaguz on Frozen Temple. So he opened with like Ling Muta. It was a very small group of Muta. What do you make? Seven Muta into the opponent main. You could say it was a sort of extraordinary force. And he traded those for workers while massing roaches behind. So his style on this particular map was basically to create the biggest possible roach mess in the opponent's bases. He didn't go for like big, straightforward engagements where I want to like get a certain upgrade and then have a huge Roach Ravager army and then take a big fight. He did take a couple big fights, but it seemed like the main idea was to focus a little bit more on extraordinary forces and just keep Iagus on the back foot the entire game. So it's like some roaches come in, some mutas come in, have to go defend this. Some roaches come in and then they burrow and spread out. And anytime Iagus would bring defense, Violet would burrow his roaches, box them in half, send like 3 roaches this way, 3 roaches that way. That's a really big pain for the opponent because either they need to spend a lot of money in missile turrets to cover all their base for detection, or they have to spend scans, which is money that they could have spent into mules, or energy they could have spent into mules. So one particular combo that I've done in ZVP a lot, which is kind of a more simple style, but similar idea to Nerchio's attack. So say ZVP, we'll label that one ZVT. CVT 7 Muta into Tunnel Roach and Ravager. This one would just be +1 ranged attack, Mass Roach with Ling. 4 roaches in Overlord. Roachling. Attack opponent 3rd. So this particular combo, I did one game and the 4 roaches killed 47 probes. They killed every single probe in the opponent's main and then went down to the opponent's natural, killed every single probe in the opponent's natural. In some people were like, oh, this Protoss is bad. If you look at the replay, we looked at it after and kind of looked at their vision. Since I was pushing directly at their 3rd with a big army, their attention was focused there and their camera was focused there. And it was a pretty close fight. Like, they were trading decently well. They were kind of being pushed back a little bit, but it was a very kind of big moment, and they failed to see the alert on the minimap and they failed to address the roach drop and lost to the extraordinary force, even if they mostly defended the main army. So you can kind of afford to trade slightly poorly with your direct army if your extraordinary force is doing really, really well.
How important is the Overlord speed in all this?
Overlord speed is sort of a really nice macro trimming that you can take after layer and after an upgrade, pretty much in every matchup. So in ZVZ, Overlord speed keeps you safer against Muta players. It keeps you safer against Ravager shots. It's a lot easier to dodge the Corrosive Bile. And you can also patrol your Overlords on the map with Overlord speed, and it's just really hard for the Ravagers to hit them. But if you're doing drop play and it's past a lair tech, you should pretty much always be taking Overlord speed. There's a pretty nice opening that you can do. It's 17 hatch, 18 gas, 17 pool, Ling speed, pull 2 workers off gas, and then at 50% speed, Evo chamber, at 100% Evo, Dropper Lord. Say you make 8 lings from the Evo chamber. And then you just put 8 lings in the Dropper Lord. With this particular opening, you can just do a slow Overlord drop, you could put it, and then use the 8 lings to kind of drop. Whenever you apply extraordinary pressure with a ling drop or a roach drop or whatever, the opponent will often react with some form of defense. Like they'll patrol some stalkers in the main, or they'll build some cannons. And you can kind of shape the game with your use of direct and indirect forces. So if they invest in defense in their main and natural to be safe against drops, that's subtracting some resource that they could have applied to their main army, which means if they attack you, it's going to be a bit weaker, and if they're defending your main army, it's going to be a bit weaker.
Yeah, that looks like exactly like my build right now. The 17 hatch, 18 gas, 17 wool. But when do you go for the third hatchery? Like in the middle of this, or?
No, usually at about 30 supply. So
Okay.
one thing that changed between Heart of the Storm and Legacy of the Void was hatcheries give you 6 supply, up from 2. So they're kind of like an overlord. You could think of them that way, where it's a slightly more expensive overlord, well, more than triple the cost, but it's also a point of production. So Zerg mechanics, rather than have more barracks and more gateways producing more units, it's hatcheries that produce all the units. So even if you don't plan to saturate your bases fully, you can get value from the hatchery by virtue of being able to make more stuff, more lings and more roaches and that sort of thing. So I don't know if you got the link to the notes.
Oh yeah, I'm in it right now. Yeah.
Excellent. So I did a demo of the triple prong attack that Neuro did against Showtime in Game 1 of the DreamHack Finals. Could do another demo on a different map. Okay, so let's think about one which doesn't involve drops. Frozen Temple is a very horizontal map that's pretty short vertically. I'll invite people to the games. Okay. Are you on any server at the moment?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Let's see.
I just typed out the channel name in Discord.
Oh.
And I'll invite you.
There you go.
A pretty good mindset to have with application of aggressive moves, normal, extraordinary forces, all that, is rather than hope that one particular group of units is going to be successful, think about it like you're giving the opponent things to deal with, where if they don't deal with them, they're going to have a very, very bad time. Basic AI. So this map for ZDZ gets pretty interesting in Roach versus Roach, and this is one of the best maps to divide your forces on. The center path is pretty short in terms of rush distance, and the choke at the top is incredibly small. Anyone seen the movie 300?
Yes.
So basically, the idea there is if you have a narrow choke, less units can defend a much larger army and trade really well, just because you kind of funnel them in and reduce their numbers by a really big margin. This map you can kind of think of in a similar way, that path down the center. In the Ling Bane stage, it's less of a factor, because those units are just smaller in general, and usually there won't be a huge standing army at the top. But roaches are quite wide. They have a bigger hitbox, and I think it's about maybe 5 or 6 roaches wide total. So if you're going roach, and the opponent is also going roach, and the main lane is sort of occupied by both players, and you can't just push up and overpower them, using the side lanes is really, really crucial. So I'm going to do a basic opening build. Hatch gas pool. It's probably the safest build. One thing I've been doing in ZVZ on this map is just going for a drone scout after my hatch. The reason for this is so I won't be taken by surprise by 1312 or 1414. The drone scout is a little bit late, so I won't be able to change my build in terms of hatch gas pool, but I can change how I spend my gas. If I see a cheese, instead of taking lane speed with my first 100 gas, I can take a Bane Nest and then defend pretty easily. So we see this. Let's pretend that the opponent is opening normally. The AI pretty much never opens normally, but we're pretending. Thinking about Overlord spread. Putting the first Overlord kind of here-ish, second Overlord here. Kind of like I mentioned before, the hatcheries are really big points of value for Zerg. So in ZVZ, the third hatch is a really big point of contention, where if you take the earlier third, you have a really big advantage of larva, production, and potential income. But it's a big expenditure that can't actively fight. So you have to have a plan for how to defend that. We'll go Bane Nest next. So notice outside the opponent's natural, there are two overlords that kind of have vision that's non-overlapping, and allows me to see the exits of all three attack lanes. So it's around 34 supply. It's a good time to take a third base. And then the fourth and fifth overlords, we'll put at the side lanes, so I can see any units running around. Lane counters are pretty good on this map. I'll be demonstrating roach counters later on.
So is it ZVZ specific that you go the Baneling Nest before the Evo Chamber?
Yes.
Okay.
In ZVZ, you can go for a fast Evo Chamber, but it's a bit of a gamble. If the opponent scouts you early, say it was on this map, they scouted you early and they saw that you built an Evo Chamber. If you research something from the Evo Chamber, you're either going to be investing 100 gas or 150 gas into an upgrade that'll pay off later. You could think about converting all that gas into Baneling and just attacking now. A lot of times if I see an opponent going for single or double Evo, I'll just do a huge Baneling attack, and they won't be able to match my Baneling count, and often they'll just die. I kind of like taking the Evo Chamber and Lair as your second gas is kicking in. So the Roach Horn is done. Get some creep connection. Take the watchtowers. All the cool stuff. Three base mineral, 3 gas has a pretty nice threshold. At this economy threshold, you can spend your gas into Roach and your extra mineral into drone. It's a pretty safe way to progress. 1 lane on each watchtower, Roach speed. And then now we can think about how to divide our Roach forces. We'll imagine that the opponent is around equal skill level, even with an AI. Whenever you're about to begin Roach production, the number of overlords you have to make is surprisingly greater than it was when you were droning. So making like up to 8 overlords at 3 base saturation is totally acceptable. The Roach is one of the least supply efficient units. It's very powerful for how much HP you get. They're very tanky. They can take a lot of damage, but they aren't very good when you're at 200 supply and you can't really kind of commit them. So I have lots of roaches. You can kind of run up and down the main lane. One fun move you can do against opponents is the kind of threatening posture. Say the opponent had an overlord here at the grass, at the center of the map. You can run forward like this, and then just run back. A lot of times they'll react defensively, sometimes over-defend, and think, oh shit, there's going to be a big attack, I need to make spines or roaches or whatever, and you can use that to tech up further. So like say, Hydra Den, and a second Evo and a gas. So you kind of bought some time by just posturing your army without actually committing it. So we talked earlier about using the steal function. I have a Ravager and some roaches. I could just box some group of roaches. It doesn't need to be super precise. So 7 roaches. They'll go around this side to the third. And then the main army can kind of come up here in the main lane. Keep making roaches. Cut the 4th. And say their army's here. Okay, we need to pull back. That's very strong. And the roaches come by me here. Maybe kill some drones. Assuming there was a 3rd. And say their army was coming. Retreating from this attack lane. Let's imagine their roach army was chasing us up here. We would want to establish a really nice arc, kind of at the top of the high ground. So they have a really terrible angle of engagement here. Sneaky roaches. Burrow and tunneling claws are really good on this map. There's a lot of space for roaches to move around. Cool. You basically get the idea. And the more bases are taken, the better these kind of side paths become. The 4th bases are pretty exposed on this map, so they can't really have a lot of army defending all their bases at once. So you want to kind of figure out where their main army is located at a given time, and then send roaches to places where they're not. One really cool thing that I've seen Scarlet do in ZVT is when she's going for something like Ling Bane Muta, she'll do a big Ling drop at the same time. That's another combo we could add to the list. Another one is Ultra, Ravager, Infester, maybe Corruptor as well. Attack opponent 5th. Midas Lings to opponent main. Why does everyone go roaches in ZVZ? Not everyone does. It's actually quite viable to play Muta or even upgraded Lings or Hydra Lurker. ZVZ is pretty dynamic at the moment. The roach stage is pretty big, so if you're going to try and play around roaches, you'll need to have some way to account for defending the really strong roach timings. So say you're going like 2 base Muta, you'll want to make either some of your own defensive roaches while you buy time for Mutas, or spines or a bunch of Lings, or counterattack with Lings. Yeah, I think we covered the bulk of the concepts. Any additional questions, fam?
This is kind of probably obvious. I just don't know myself. But when do you start upgrading your other bases to like layers and stuff. Is that ever throughout the game what you
Mm,
should do, or you should
no,
just stay hatchery?
mainly you would only start another layer if you feel like your layer or your hive is going to be killed. It
Okay.
doesn't increase your production or anything. It's just kind of the single piece you need to unlock certain tech options in the game.
Right.
So if you have the layer, you have access to the Hydra Den, Spire, Infestation Pit, Overseer, those various things. But having an additional layer doesn't benefit you further unless
Right.
you're about to lose one.
Okay.
So that's actually something worth mentioning where, say you have a huge Zealot warp in that gets into your main, and they're focusing down your hive as it's building, and you realize that your army is too far away and you can't defend it, that's a really good point to start a lair. A lot of players
Okay.
like kind of panic and they'll hesitate and they'll say, I don't know if I can defend this. This Protoss is an asshole. I'm upset. And then they've lost their lair, and then DTs come in, and it's pretty terrible.
Right.
Yeah. There's I think it's Bruce Lee. He says, the wise can learn more from foolish questions than a fool can learn from a wise answer. So don't be afraid to ask like questions, even if it might seem like, oh, maybe this is too obvious. Usually there's something that can be gained from that.
Okay, so then coming off that, then like I've been sort of sticking to this build where double evolution chamber is like kind of the big point of it, but oftentimes I feel like that sets me behind like in a lot of ways because I'm committing a lot to that and I need time.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just die to to like a giant army or whatever at like 5 minutes because I'm waiting for my +2s or whatever.
Which matchup?
Definitely anything but Zerg. I feel like ZVZ is definitely my best matchup because I can just defend with lings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going for like a Hydralisk, like the build is like Hydralisks into Ultralisks, and so you want, everyone to be upgraded, especially the Ultralisks. So you're going for the melee upgrades and then the armor. And once anything past like 7 or 8 minutes, I feel like I've got the late game with the Ultralisks. But before that, I'm definitely in trouble, sort of.
Did you watch Neuro versus Polt?
I did not.
So.
Or wait, that's the Zerg who beat Polt, right? Neuro won that, right? Yeah, I did watch that actually.
So
that was the French guy, right? Yeah, or the Swedish, I forget.
European
Anyway.
of some kind, yeah.
Yeah.
But he did something that was kind of interesting. He went for melee upgrades, and he had an upgrade advantage pretty much the whole game. So it's kind of similar to your approach. But he just built tons of roaches over the course of the game. Like, in the early and mid game, one of the things that changed between Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void is we only get 3 larvae per inject now. It used to be 4. So when it was 4, lings were more reasonable to make off of 2 bases and then 3 bases. Whereas now, it's a pretty big commitment. It's a very big expenditure in your larva. Whereas roaches, in kind of low upgrade scenarios against early attacks, are incredibly sturdy and strong. So you can think about using the roach as a sort of stepping stone to get into your hive tech goal of Ultralisk and Hydra. Hydras on their own, as you probably know, are pretty fragile, and if they attack you directly and you have naked Hydras, they just die.
Okay.
But roaches can kind of hold their own and at least die slow enough that your reinforcements can usually turn the tide of the fight. So you might add a timing for a safety Roach Warren in your build. Like maybe when you make the Evos, you could just make a Roach Warren. You could still go for your melee upgrades, but then say make like 7 Roaches. And just have that as a sort of safety expenditure.
So say they go for Liberators or something like that, or didn't Hydras deal with Liberators well?
The fantastic thing about Roach Warren is you've also unlocked Ravager tech for free.
Oh, right.
So having some Ravagers mixed in. Another cool thing too is Ravagers are not a very upgrade dependent unit. They don't have a speed upgrade you have to get. They don't have, well, the majority of their damage often is in Corrosive Bile. It's not their attack damage. So you can keep those melee upgrades running and get into that really strong ultralist stage and use the roaches and the ravagers as a sort of way to survive the mid game and not die to liberators. You won't really die to bio that much if you have a bunch of roach ravager.
Okay.
You definitely won't die to hellbats. Yeah, good question.
So I have a question of in Heart of the Swarm I was playing basically every matchup I was going Ling Bang Muta because that was fun and Lings are awesome. Now with the larva shortage, I've had to adapt and adopt a roach style, and I've been playing roaches versus Terran a lot more. However, I encounter there's a certain point where it all just goes south if I haven't won the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting out of that mindset of going roaches, right? How do you how do you identify the next step or the next key point to move out of roaches and into a winning composition?
So we'll probably try and find the VODs for it, but that's basically the idea of Inertio style, was to use the Roach Ravager as a stepping stone rather than the final idea. If you go for ranged attack upgrades for your roaches, it further commits you to that, and it makes it kind of weaker transitioning into hive tech. One thing that you can adjust a little bit is start with the Carapace upgrade first, and then kind of decide how you want to play out the game. If you want to go for melee upgrade next or ranged upgrade next. If you feel like the opponent is kind of weak, you could go ranged upgrades, +1 and then +2, and just overpower the opponent and kill them. If you feel like they're playing very sturdily and kind of defensively, you could go melee and have a plan to get into Ultra and Chitinous plating. One of the things that they changed with Legacy was they made the Tier 3 tech transition stronger than it was in HOTS. So while they did nerf our larva per inject, they buffed the Ultra quite a bit, and the Broodlord is stronger as well. So Tier 3 is a really fantastic point for Zerg. So thinking about not just having the mid-game plan of, say, Roachling Ravager, but getting that Infestation Pit at a reasonable time. It's very rare that you build an Infestation Pit and then you die from that expenditure. It's only 100 gas. It's a fairly cheap building. So if you're making a lot of Roachling Ravager, you have a lot of army, you're not very likely to die to big attacks if you have similar production to the opponent. So just go Infestation Pit, Hive, Ultra Cavern, Chitinous Plating. It's a really, really strong play, regardless of what Terran's doing. The Ultra as a unit is, I think, the second most larva efficient in the game. I mean, Queen is infinitely efficient because it doesn't cost larva, but 500 resource, 1 larva. And also the armor value of that unit is just incredible. So whether they're going mech or bio, even if they're going air, mixing a couple ultras like to act as a main tank for your army can be really good. So it's really nice to kind of have your strategy revolve around that unit. One interesting thing is the Ultra isn't nearly as good against Protoss. For what reason? Can anyone guess?
Immortals.
Oh, brilliant. Pretty much, yeah. The Immortal is incredibly strong as a general unit. A lot of Protoss styles right now revolve around going for double Robo when their third base economy kicks in, and then Chrono boosting out Immortal production. With their barrier, with their armor, and their high damage against armored units, it's just a general fantastic unit for Protoss to make. So if they have an Immortal-based army, an Ultra transition is kind of like playing into them in a way that's really poor. Where Broodlord is kind of the preferred ground unit to go for to reach a critical mass against Protoss.
So that's probably why I'm getting completely swept by Protoss full engagement, because I just have like Hydralix and Ultralith, right? If they have a big Immortal count.
Yeah, Broodlord
Okay.
is kind of the critical mass unit you would want to go for, where if they're going for a ground army and you go for mass Broodlord, say like 10 to 15, there's
Wow,
actually no possible way they can beat you without a Tempest transition. Protoss has to kind of transition into air to beat a Broodlord switch if you have Hydras to support them. But you can think about the Hydra as having a similar supporting role to both Ultras and Broodlords, where they're natural complements for each other. Neither Broodlord nor Ultra can shoot air, and they're both kind of very slow, but they're sturdy. So any unit that's going to do well against Broodlords usually is going to do poorly against Hydra. So like Blink Stalkers do really well against Broods if they can blink under them, but Hydras trade really well against Stalkers. So you just sit your Hydras under the Broods and kind of let the Broodlords slowly siege into them. Ultras,
And what's a
similarly.
good timing to start getting Broodlords? It's like same timing as the Ultras?
So typically when Hive Tech begins, so say your Hive just finished, you can go for... Back up a little bit. When you start your Hive, so you have an infestation pit, you start your Hive. If you start your Spire, then your Hive and your Spire will be done at a similar time. And then you can morph your Spire into a Greater Spire and take an Ultra Cavern. It's sort of an expensive progression of moves.
Right.
So you would want to be doing this when you have at least 4 base of gas. And then you're taking your 5th base. That's kind of when it's happening. But yeah, both of the units are incredibly cost effective. That's why tier 3 transitions are so potent and important for Zerg.
And this was yesterday. I don't know if I'm sure you remember. Katz was playing you, and you guys. He pulled out like a bunch of swarm hosts. Was that like map specific, or was that like a? Okay.
Yeah. So Dusk Towers is a very turtley map, which means you can defend 3 bases very easily. He skipped Roach and he skipped Muta and went directly into Swarm Host after having some upgraded Lings and Spines. So I tried to go for a Roach timing, and he defended that really cleanly, and then he got into a really big Swarm Host production cycle, and then was nidusing Swarm Hosts across the map. One thing that I could have done was, as soon as my lair is done, Overseer Scout and see how he's investing in his tech. If I saw that he was going for Swarm Host, I could go pretty aggressively into Muta and try and spread my Overlords on the map as much as possible. So the success of Swarm Host Nidus depends upon being able to get your Overseers in position to plant the Nidus. If the Muta player, say for example against the Swarm Host player, has really nice Overlord spread, say you draw a line across the map, kind of dotted with Overlords, any Overseer that comes across, send some Mutas, kill it before the Nidus builds, and then you have a really clean progression into Ultra. Swarm Hosts are very expensive, it kind of delays the progression into Hive Tech, so in ZVZ, if the opponent is turtling, getting those tier 3 units out means you're going to be very, very strong. Ultras even trade well against Lurkers, which is a little bit surprising, but it kind of fits that theme of Blizzard trying to make tier 3 units really, really strong in StarCraft, so players feel rewarded for getting to endgame tech, rather than just staying on lair for a long time. Memes.
When you address the Zerg versus Protoss matchup, right? Do you have any preset plan regardless of the map, just to use the fact that Protoss are weak in the early game?
One thing that I've been doing recently is playing a lot more Ling Bane against Protoss. It does depend on the map a little bit, like how aggressive you can be. Kind of going back to Dusk Towers against Cats. It's a turtley map, so attacking into a Protoss third on that map is generally going to be worse than on a map like Frozen Temple. You could think about the distance between the bases. As that distance increases, attacking becomes better. So a Nexus is a very strong, sturdy structure, but the area between the Nexi is vulnerable. So whenever they're setting up that third, they transfer probes, and you can sort of run in Lings and then pick off probes as they're going between the bases. That's something you can go for regardless of whether you're going for Ling Bane or like Ling Roach Hydra Lurker. Just having fast units in the game that are picking off any points of weakness. That principle of controlling the area between the bases applies in a lot of scenarios. One of them is defending against Phoenix. So Phoenix has kind of come in. Say you knew that was coming. You built your spores, say 2 spores per worker line. You want to make sure that your hatches are rallied to the nearest resource patch, so they don't go between bases. The Phoenixes want to pick up any drones, any queens, any hydras that are being transferred in small numbers, but they can't really confront and float over the spores for a long period of time. Mutalisks, similarly, in ZBZ. So say you have a Roach player and a Muta player. The Muta player doesn't really want to fly in and trade with the spores if the spores have queen support, but they can sit between the bases and then pick off any of the drones or the queens or the hydras that are being transferred between. I'll share the notes again for anyone who has joined late. Yeah, I think we covered what we needed to.
You said one replay at the beginning. With who was what was the matchup? Because I watched the Polt versus that other guy, but then what was the one before that?
Neuro versus Showtime.
Showtime. Okay.
Yeah, game 1. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, is this the whole series? Oh, nice, it is. Yeah, dude, like, he just fucked him so hard. It was like one moment of 3 different points of attack all at once, and he just fell apart. Showtime, to his credit, adapted incredibly well to the playstyle of Neuro, but for ladder players where the opponent doesn't have very much prior experience against you, having those kinds of combo moves are super potent.
Yeah, just seeing the title of the class yesterday, I was decided to like try it out myself, being a silver shit, and they don't even react whatsoever. Like I'll just kill all their workers in their second or their natural or whatever while I'm attacking the front. It's really funny actually.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of most widespread bad habits for players in general, is over focusing on the main army and not really zooming out their gaze and thinking about what's happening on the map. You play Dota, correct? So
yeah.
So a lot of players will like over focus on their hero and like what's immediately around them, and they won't think about how many enemies are missing on the map, like what's going on in the game. They'll just be like trying to get their last hits, trying to harass the opponents in the lane, and then they get ganked by like 4 people who come.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely like a tier thing too. Like as you go up, obviously it lessens, and the same thing here in StarCraft. Yeah.
They've done some study of where StarCraft players kind of focus their eyes over the course of a game, and it seems like the higher players get into the professional level, the more they focus on the minimap, just because of how much information that area gives you per pixel on your monitor. It's much, much greater than the rest of your screen, per se.
And this is just a question for me, but what do you think is like the most... Because I've literally started this game like 4 days ago, but I've coming from Dota, like I was really committed to it, pretty high like rated and everything, so I'm putting all that in StarCraft now. So like what is the biggest like difference between like a below gold and like up in terms of play? Like bad mistakes, I guess.
It's actually worker production, which
That's
is...
Okay.
It's kind of subtle. A lot of people think I need to make a big army, but to make big armies and sustain that army production over time, you would think about it like a race to make workers in the early game. Like in StarCraft, in the early game, it's very quiet. There's no fighting going on. And a lot of times one player will just massively outpace the opponent's economy, and then for the rest of the game, they'll be able to make more stuff. So having a really optimized build and thinking about pressing the drone button kind of like you're trying to get last hits in the game. Every opportunity you miss is a mistake. Every time you have larva that's just sitting in the game, it's not becoming a drone, you have a problem. Or you need to make some army. It should either be I'm using my larva to make drones, or I'm using my larva to make army. There should never be a point where I have larva and I'm not sure what to do. Most of the time, it's better to just spend it, and if you make army instead of workers, just use it. Attack with the army, and then go back to
and
drone.
don't just wait around. That's a big mistake of mine, I would say. And then, so once you start like over droning, into late game, like I find like I've all these idle workers back at my base and like my natural and stuff because it's just completed, eating everything. Is 4 bases like good to sustain you for the whole game, or do you find yourself having like way more than that past like 25 minutes or whatever?
Some basic thresholds for like a economy size in StarCraft would be around 70. 70 workers is usually pretty good. One thing you can do is go into the replay and kind of see what you are reaching over the course of a match. I'm going to link an article real fast. This is from Wings of Liberty, but it still applies now. It's asking the question, do you macro like a pro? And it has a couple different metrics of like injecting, worker production, and it's asking like what's the main thing that separates players by skill in StarCraft, and worker production ends up being the thing. But there's a button, I don't know if you have it hotkeyed at the moment. I actually just started hotkeying it recently. If you go hotkeys, global, unit management, idle worker. So if you
that's my F1 too. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, using that, and then I think it's control. If you press control and then that button, it will select all idle workers in the game.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's a really nice way of like, say your main mined out, or like a couple gas geysers mined out, pressing that and then sending those to the fresh base is a really good way of keeping the economy going.
Okay.
There are some magical timings in StarCraft for kind of stopping your worker production and doing an army production cycle. In ZVP, it's usually you can rush for 3 base drone saturation for minerals, so 16, 16, 16, and then make a big flood of lings. Just because a lot of the aggressive moves like adept timings, warp prism, harass, they'll hit right around that time. And with the flow of the maps in Legacy, your first 2 bases are usually very easy to defend, and the 3rd base is more difficult to defend, and the 4th base is even harder. So it's kind of like, as your number of bases increases, defense becomes more and more difficult. But a shift from Wings of Liberty to Heart of the Swarm to Legacy is they've basically given you more and more time to establish a bigger and bigger economy before you need to be making army.
Gotcha. And then sort of back to the topic that the class started with. I'm not sure if I missed this or not, but would it be like, what is more optimal, like 8 lings or 4 roaches in the drop?
It depends.
Or does that even matter?
It depends on what you're trying to do with them. Like the speedlings are going to be faster. So say
they have less time to react to it.
Yeah, ZVP opening with a ling drop opener is a potential harass, but it's also a really good scout. So you can think about, instead of just dropping the lings in one place and trying to deal immediate damage, you can drop the lings and then run through their territory and just see what's up. You can see
Okay.
what their production looks like. You can see if they have defense. If they don't have any defense at all, you could potentially do a bigger drop later on. But if you want to talk about like a value drop that's going to get the most damage in for the Overlord size, 4 roaches is definitely better than 8 lings.
Okay.
In ZVP, zealots, adepts, both counter lings, and they're
Right.
pretty cheap. So they can just warp in a couple zealots, a couple adepts, and then clean up the lings. Roaches beat both zealots and adepts, so they have to get a much bigger sort of defensive force to beat 4 roaches than they do 8 lings. Another thing to think about is 2 lurkers and an overlord is a big pain in the ass for Protoss to deal with, because not only do they have to be able to beat the lurkers, they have to provide detection.
Right. Okay.
Nice. What's up, Ray Rain? I think we basically covered the majority of it. I might hang out in Discord for some games, maybe play on EU for a little bit, and people can ask questions and stuff. That would be cool.
So this is open question time.
Yeah, dude.
Okay. The you linked a 14 gas 14 pool ZVZ guide,
Mm-hmm.
and that's sort of been my like. Well, I guess it's like the only guide I have for ZVZ right now. But how often do you go to that? Is that more of a cheese or?
1414, think of it like a middle path. I think there are notes for that in the video. I'll link the video first and then
Okay.
see if the Google Doc is in there. But one thing that I kind of wanted to figure out with ZVZ was you have like economy focused builds where you're trying to get more drones than the opponent, and then you have cheesing builds where you're heavily committing to attack. But there is a sort of middle ground between them where you have units to defend attacks or punish someone who's greedy, but you have a stable enough economy that you can play a macro game off the back of it. And that's kind of where 1414 fits in Legacy of the Void.
Okay.
So addressing 1414, I've noticed that since you produced that video, I've been looking at it and doing that like every game because I'm a piece of shit and I love cheesing. It feels real good, right? So there are games, there are maps like Ruins of whatever you call it that starts with an E. That
Indeed,
map,
yeah.
yeah. That map feels like it's way too big of a rush distance to do that effectively, and you know it feels like I get drone scouted every map or every time on that map, and by the time lings are capable of getting there, the defense is already there and the lings don't accomplish anything, and I feel behind, and so I get sucked into this mode where time to all in, because if I don't do anything with these lings, I lose this game.
Mm-hmm. So, Endion, I feel like 1414 is still okay, but it's not going to be as deadly. It can be more of like a pressure move where you have the ability to prevent the opponent from messing with the destructible rocks, which has some value, and you're going to clearly have the opponent force what they're going to do. So they can't be greedy, they can't take like 3 hatch before pool, they can't break their rocks with like a 17 pool gasless. You can punish that. But typically I'll be opening hatch gas pool on Endion, just because like you pointed out, it is a pretty long rush. You were asking about defending 1414, I think, at the start of that?
No, like they will send a drone scout and they'll see that I'm 14-4. What? Yeah.
Yeah, you can still go for it. Like, it's still a pretty strong attack. Or you can adjust your build slightly. Instead of going for a Bane Nest, you can go for an Evo Chamber upgrade. Because with 1414, if they go for a Drone Scout, they're usually going to have a more economic opener than you. So you can take the advantage of earlier gas being translated into an earlier upgrade, rather than trying to commit Banelings into like Queens and Spines.
Okay.